The Pizza Bomber. Part 1. The Countdown. There are moments in history that become famous because of what people saw. And then there are moments that become unforgettable because of what nobody understood. On August 28th, 2003, television cameras captured one of the most disturbing deaths in American criminal history. A man sat handcuffed in the middle of a parking lot. Around his neck was a bomb. Police surrounded him from a distance. Bomb technicians raced toward the scene. The man kept saying the same thing. "You have to help me." At first, officers believed he was lying. Criminals lie all the time. Maybe the bomb was fake. Maybe this was another desperate attempt to escape arrest. Then they saw the collar itself. Steel, locked, wired into several sealed compartments. Nothing about it looked improvised. The parking lot was evacuated. Officers backed away and waited for the bomb squad. And the man sat there, handcuffed, alone, for 25 minutes, begging, asking if anyone had called his employer because he didn't want them to think he'd abandon his shift, listening for sirens that hadn't arrived yet. Then the device began to beep, faster, louder. The man looked toward the officer standing just out of reach. So it's going to go off. Moments later, it exploded. The blast was so powerful that officers several yards away instinctively dove for cover. The man died where he sat. The horrifying moment was broadcast across the United States. To millions watching the evening news, the story seemed simple. A bank robber, a bomb, a failed robbery. Case closed. But almost nothing about that first impression was true, because the bomb was real. The robbery had been planned months in advance. The victim may never have expected to die. And before the FBI finished investigating, they would uncover a conspiracy so bizarre that one veteran investigator admitted it looked more like the plot of a movie than a real criminal case. This is the story of Brian Wells, the pizza delivery driver who walked into a bank with a bomb locked around his neck, and the impossible question that haunted investigators from the very beginning. Was he a criminal? Or was he the first victim? Ettore. 3 hours earlier, Brian Wells was driving through Erie, Pennsylvania, delivering pizzas like he had done hundreds of times before. 46 years old, quiet, reliable, the kind of employee who had worked at the same neighborhood pizza shop for nearly a decade. Nothing about that Thursday suggested history was waiting for him. Just after 1:30, an order came into the restaurant. 2 small pizzas. The delivery address was unusual. Not a house, not an apartment. An isolated television transmission tower at the edge of town. Brian picked up the pizzas, climbed into his car, and drove away. It would be the last delivery of his life. What happened at that tower remains one of the most important moments in the entire investigation. Because nobody witnessed what took place there. Investigators would later spend years trying to reconstruct those missing minutes. What they believe happened and what Brian believed was happening may have been 2 completely different things. Roughly an hour later, Brian walked through the front doors of a PNC bank. Customers stood in line. Tellers counted cash. No one looked twice at the middle-aged pizza delivery driver wearing sunglasses. Then, he reached beneath his shirt, Not for a wallet, not for a note, for a shotgun disguised as a walking cane. The room froze. Brian pointed the weapon toward the tellers and handed over a typed note. The instructions were oddly specific. He wasn't asking for all the money. He demanded $250,000. Then he lifted his shirt. Around his neck was a thick steel collar. Attached to it was what looked like a homemade bomb. The teller stared at it. She couldn't tell if it was real. Brian insisted it was. She emptied the drawers as quickly as she could, but there wasn't enough cash. Instead of the $250,000 the note demanded, Brian received just $8,702. He took the money, turned around, walked out the front door, and drove away. What happened over the next several minutes would become one of the most analyzed police responses in FBI history. Because Brian Wells wasn't trying to disappear. He was driving towards something described in a set of instructions no officer had seen yet. Instructions that would transform an ordinary bank robbery into one of the strangest criminal conspiracies America has ever known. The Pizza Bomber, Part 2. The Game. Minutes after leaving the bank, Brian Wells' luck ran out. A Pennsylvania State Police trooper spotted his maroon Geo Metro driving along Peach Street. The description matched the one broadcast over the radio. The officer pulled him over in the parking lot of an Eyeglass World store. It should have been the easiest part of the day. A routine felony stop. Instead, it became one of the most disturbing police encounters ever recorded. Brian stepped out of the car exactly as he was told. He didn't run, he didn't fight, he didn't even try to escape. He sat down on the pavement while officers handcuffed him behind his back. Then he looked up and calmly said something that made everyone pause. "It's going to explode." The officers glanced at each other. "What is?" Brian lifted his head as much as the handcuffs would allow. "The bomb." At first, nobody moved. Police had dealt with bomb threats before. Most of them were hoaxes. People claimed to have explosives all the time. Very few actually did. One officer cautiously stepped closer. The metal collar around Brian's neck wasn't duct tape. It wasn't plastic. It was a heavy steel device locked tightly around his throat. Wires disappeared into several homemade compartments. A digital timer was visible. This wasn't something Brian could simply take off. The officers backed away. Immediately, the parking lot was evacuated. Nearby businesses were cleared. Pedestrians were ordered to run. Traffic stopped in every direction. Within minutes, what had started as a bank robbery had become a bomb scene. Brian remained seated on the asphalt, handcuffed, alone. He repeatedly told officers the same story. Someone had locked the bomb around his neck. He'd been given instructions. If he followed them exactly, the bomb would eventually be removed. But if he failed, he would die. To the officers listening from a safe distance, it sounded almost unbelievable. Who would build a bomb, strap it to another human being, and then send that person to rob a bank? The answer seemed too absurd to be real. Then Brian added something even stranger. He said there were written instructions inside his car. Officers couldn't risk approaching the vehicle, not until bomb technicians arrived. So they waited. 25 minutes passed. Brian sat there the entire time, growing more desperate, listening for sirens that never seemed to arrive fast enough. Then a sharp electronic beep echoed across the parking lot. Brian's eyes widened. "So it's going to go off," he said. The timer had reached its final seconds. Officers shouted for everyone to get back. There was nothing else they could do. At 3:18 p.m., roughly 50 minutes after Brian first walked out of the bank, the device detonated. The explosion echoed across the shopping center. For several moments, no one moved. When the smoke cleared, Brian Wells was dead. The nation saw the explosion. The FBI saw something else. A bomb sophisticated enough to kill. A robbery that made almost no sense. And a man whose final words suggested he believed someone somewhere intended to let him live. Hours later, agents searched Brian's abandoned car. Inside, they found the pages he had been talking about. One agent unfolded the first sheet. He expected a robbery plan. Instead, he found a sentence that stopped him cold. It was the beginning of a scavenger hunt. Drive here, find a key, unlock a box, retrieve another clue, travel to another location, find another key, then another and another. Each step promised the same reward. Complete the game, and the bomb would be removed. The instructions stretched across multiple pages, maps, timers, precise directions, contingency plans. It wasn't the work of someone acting on impulse. Whoever designed this had obsessed over every detail. One investigator later described the plot as unlike anything he had ever encountered in his career. It wasn't just a robbery anymore. It was a script, a deadly script. And if the FBI was right, Brian Wells had been cast in the lead role long before he ever walked into that bank. The question was no longer how the bomb exploded. The question was, who wrote the game? The pizza bomber. Part 3. The Mastermind. For the first 48 hours, the FBI worked under one assumption. Brian Wells had either planned the robbery or he had been forced into it. There didn't seem to be a third option. But the evidence refused to fit neatly into either story. The scavenger hunt was too elaborate to have been improvised. The bomb was too sophisticated to have been built in an afternoon. And the delivery location, the isolated television transmission tower, felt less like a coincidence and more like the place where the entire operation had begun. Agents returned to the tower. The area was eerily quiet. Dense woods, dirt access roads, no nearby homes. Exactly the kind of place where no one would notice a meeting. As they searched the ground, investigators found pieces of the puzzle. Fresh tire tracks, discarded cable ties, lengths of wire, fragments that suggested several people had been there not long before Brian arrived with the pizzas. Someone had prepared this location. Someone had been waiting. The FBI began reconstructing Brian's final afternoon. Their theory was chilling. Brian delivered the pizzas. He met one or more people at the tower. Somewhere during that encounter, the steel collar was locked around his neck. He was handed the cane shotgun, the robbery note, the scavenger hunt. Then he was sent into town with one impossible mission: rob the bank. Follow every instruction. Stay alive. But one question kept bothering investigators. Why Brian? Why choose a 46-year-old pizza delivery driver with no history of sophisticated bank robberies? The answer didn't come from forensic evidence. It came from people. As agents interviewed friends, co-workers, and local residents, one name surfaced again and again and again. Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong. People described her in remarkably similar ways. Highly intelligent, exceptionally manipulative, capable of charming someone one moment and terrifying them the next. She wasn't unknown to police. Years earlier, she had been involved in violent incidents and had drawn the attention of investigators more than once. Now, her name was appearing in connection with the strangest robbery the FBI had ever investigated. But there was still no proof. Then the investigation took a turn no one expected. A man named William Bill Rothstein contacted authorities. He wanted to talk. When detectives arrived at his modest home, Rothstein made a confession. Not about the bank robbery, about a murder. He told investigators there was a body inside his house, hidden in a freezer. When agents opened it, they found the remains of James Roden. The discovery stunned everyone. Suddenly, the pizza bomber investigation wasn't just about a robbery. It wasn't even just about Brian Wells anymore. Now there was a second homicide. Rothstein claimed that Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong had shot Roden, her boyfriend of 10 years, during a dispute. He admitted helping her hide the body and clean up afterward in exchange for $2,000. At the time, investigators didn't yet understand how the two cases connected. But they were about to find out that Roden's death wasn't the reason the bank robbery happened. It was something the robbery plot accidentally exposed. A killing meant to protect a much larger secret. Then another person decided to cooperate. A local drug dealer named Kenneth Barnes. His testimony would change the direction of the entire investigation. Because according to Barnes, the bank robbery had never been about getting rich. It had a very specific purpose. One that had nothing to do with Brian Wells at all. The Pizza Bomber. Part 4. The End Game. Kenneth Barnes didn't just give investigators another suspect, he gave them a motive. And it wasn't the one anyone expected. According to Barnes, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong believed her father, Harold Diehl, was sitting on a fortune he had no intention of sharing with her. She wanted him dead. Not for revenge, for the inheritance. Barnes told investigators that Diehl-Armstrong had approached him with an offer. Kill her father, and she would pay him $250,000. There was just one problem. Diehl-Armstrong didn't have that kind of money, not yet. According to Barnes, that's where the bank robbery came in. The heist was never meant to make the conspirators rich. It was meant to finance a murder that hadn't happened yet. Robbing the bank was step 1. Killing Harold Diehl was supposed to be step 2. If that account was true, Brian Wells hadn't just stumbled into a bizarre robbery. He had been recruited to fund a killing he almost certainly knew nothing about. And James Roden? Investigators came to believe his death was a separate later tragedy, one caused by the robbery plot rather than the reason for it. As the scheme moved forward, Roden became a liability, someone who knew too much and might talk. Diehl-Armstrong killed him to keep the secret contained, then had Rothstein help hide the body in his freezer. One plan to fund a murder. One murder committed to protect the plan. Two entangled crimes that the FBI had to slowly pull apart, thread by thread. The FBI spent years testing Barnes' claims against every piece of evidence they had. Phone records, witness statements, forensic evidence, the scavenger hunt, financial records, Nothing was accepted simply because someone said it happened. Agents tried to determine what could actually be proven. Their conclusion was unsettling. Investigators believed the conspiracy was real. They believed Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong played the central role in planning it. And they believed Brian Wells knowingly took part in the robbery, but had been told the bomb was fake, and almost certainly underestimated the danger he was actually in. According to the government's theory, Brian expected to survive. He believed that if he completed every task on the scavenger hunt, someone would eventually unlock the steel collar from around his neck. The investigators reached a different conclusion. They believed there was never enough time built into the plan for Brian to complete it and live. The scavenger hunt wasn't designed to save him. It was designed to keep him moving. Every instruction, every destination, every promise gave him just enough hope to keep following orders while the clock counted down. If that theory is correct, then Brian Wells spent the final hour of his life trying to solve a puzzle that had no real chance of saving him. In 2010, after one of the strangest federal prosecutions in recent memory, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong was convicted for her role in the conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. William Rothstein died of cancer before he could stand trial for the bank robbery conspiracy. Kenneth Barnes testified for the government and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. One by one, the people who knew the most about the plot disappeared, taking many of the answers with them. More than 20 years later, one image still defines the case, not the robbery, not the investigation, not the trial. A man sitting alone in a parking lot, surrounded by police, wearing a bomb around his neck, begging for help. Most people who watch that footage assume they were witnessing the end of a bank robbery. The FBI believed they were witnessing the final moments of a conspiracy that had been set in motion long before Brian Wells ever entered the bank. But one question still refuses to disappear. How much did Brian really know? Did he willingly agree to take part in what he believed was a robbery with a fake bomb? Was he manipulated into trusting people who never intended to let him live? Or did he realize, sometime during that terrifying afternoon, that he had become a disposable piece in someone else's plan? Those questions may never be answered with complete certainty. And perhaps that's why the pizza bomber case continues to fascinate investigators, journalists, and audiences more than 2 decades later. Not because the conspiracy was impossible to solve, but because the most important mystery wasn't who built the bomb. It was what was going through Brian Wells' mind during those final minutes, when he looked at the officers standing just out of reach. Did he still believe someone was coming with the key? Or had he finally understood the truth, that the countdown had never been his enemy? Hope was, because as long as he believed he could survive, he kept playing. And that may have been exactly what the architects of the conspiracy were counting on from the very beginning.